Hello and welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Today we are speaking with Ashley Gould, founder of Âme Atendre, a luxury tabletop and home goods brand based on the conviction that well-crafted physical objects foster human connection. Gould has had a very interesting and full career trajectory, which took her from practicing law in major San Francisco area firms to in-house positions and eventually even broader leadership roles at notable companies such as Jewel and 23andMe during periods in their respective histories that might have been a little challenging. But the pandemic and a move to Utah with her family prompted her to re-examine her life and work goals. During her many years as a lawyer and executive, Gould began observing increasing detachment and misunderstanding among people. She wants to find a way to bring people of differing ideas together with more understanding and empathy, and she believes the dining table is an ideal location to foster all of the above, and I could not agree more. Please give it up for Ashley Gould. Ashley Gould, welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. I'm excited to talk with you because a lot of the things that you've based your company around and your passion and direction in creating what you have is based on something that I feel very deeply. So I'm very interested to hear more about that. And it's something that I grew up with. And that's, basically the connection and the relationships built around the environments that we inhabit and spend our time in that I think is so incredibly important. So, let's see, where should we start in understanding what you're up to now and where you've come from? Give me the 1 mile up perspective on where you found yourself over the last decade, basically.
Yeah, so I am a lawyer by training. I practiced for just about 20 years. And I think it was really COVID, honestly, which I'm sure is a familiar story, that got me thinking about, is this what I want to still be doing? How do I want to spend, the time that I have? And because we just had more time, more time to think and reflect. And during the 20 years that I was working as a lawyer, I was working extremely long hours and raising a family, and didn't really have a ton of time for reflection. So I do think obviously COVID was terrible, but there were some silver linings. And my husband and I moved our family from California to Utah during COVID. And our boys were in online school, and then they switched schools. And so there was sort of like a huge upheaval. And when it settled, it was actually, we had gotten back from a trip and my husband came down with COVID. And then one of my boys came down with COVID, and we were supposed to go visit family. So my husband took my other son, and it was the time when you didn't leave your room, you completely isolated, And I just really thought about, what is it that I want to do now? And growing up, my mom had a small stationery and small gift shop, and was a big believer in writing thank you notes and handwritten cards and that sort of a thing, which I have always loved. And she also was a wonderful entertainer. So she would just welcome people into our home, set a beautiful table, cook an amazing meal, and create just a warm space for people. And I think I was reflecting on all of that. And also the last professional experience I had, which was at Jewel, which is an e-cigarette company I'm sure people have heard of. And that was an extremely difficult experience. I went there, and several of the other companies that I had been at, they were in the pharmaceutical space, because my father had been diagnosed with a rare cancer, and I wanted to focus on helping people. And that may sound strange to some people, but to this day, I still really feel like Jewel is a harm reduction product for smokers. And I still really, really believe that it is an important product for smokers. But the company, one, was misunderstood, and two, obviously kids started using the product, and other products, which was terrible. But the vitriol that I experienced personally was extreme, I'll say, from people I knew as well as people I didn't know. And I think the part that was hardest for me to understand was from the people that I knew, because nobody wanted to sit down and have a conversation about why was I there, what was I trying to achieve. They just read the press and made judgments. And I started thinking about the macro sort of societal situation we're in. And I feel like that is the direction that we are going in. Take any topic, the presidential election, rights to your own body. I mean, you name it. And people have very strong opinions. But what I don't see is people sitting down at a table and talking about their different perspectives. And I feel like that's a change. Like when I was growing up, I feel like we were better at that. And so I kind of took these two big things. One is sort of my childhood and the things I loved about it. And then the other was this sort of growing fractured society and an inability to respect other people's opinions or even hear them. And I wanted to combine them in this company. So my company, Âme Atendre, which is French for to take care of your soul, is really focused on designing our own products, everyday products, and setting the table, like creating these objects that are beautiful and well made to set the table for the conversations that we're not having with loved ones, as well as with people we work with and people we don't know. So that's sort of, sorry, it's a bit of a long answer, but.
Yeah, no, that's great. The first of all, I introduced your company as Âme Atendre because I can barely read, apparently. So
no, it's French. It's hard.
Yeah, I have a good friend who grew up in France, and he hasn't taught me how to speak French yet, so that's my excuse. But to that name, to attend to the soul, that is interesting. I'm only, I'm pushing the border of going into the 50s, and I'm realizing how much I've taken from myself to get to where I'm at.
Yeah.
And especially as a, we'll say, provider, because both men and women are providers these days. It's not just the man who goes out and provides. And you know this from experience, I would imagine, that you lose something in that of yourself, that grind. You lose it to something outside of your family. And the only thing you have to offer back to your family directly in that one-to-one exchange is a fiat currency. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, there is the, I have a parent that is a hard worker. That's a value for a kid to see. But that's a few steps removed from looking your mother or your father in the face and having an exchange of ideas, which is provided for around a table in the proper setting, which is very interesting to me, that I'd love to get into more lately. But that a name, Atendre, am I saying that right?
Yeah, and we actually chose, it's like the old French spelling of attendre. And yes, so that's correct. And I've always told I have two boys, I've always told them,
you too.
You can't really love someone else until you love yourself. And I think you need to take care of yourself in lots of different ways, physically, mentally, emotionally, in order to be available, like truly available to love, and also I think like truly connect with other people. And so that's sort of the focus of the name.
So here's an interesting one for you. I don't know if I think this, but I'm suspicious that you can't truly love someone until you've truly hated them. And in truly getting to that point where you come to the point where you want to leave because of the confusion and the everything else that goes along with that, but you commit to what you said you would do and do the hard work of understanding that person rather than responding to the discomfort of not understanding. You're in many times opposite. It's not till the fire and the intense heat of that situation burns away the self-centeredness of yourself that you truly get to where you understand and appreciate that which balances you. And that's a really hard thing to articulate, but I think there's something in that. But it also comes in, I think, what you're saying, and that in going through the difficult work of getting past simply being angry with someone and wanting to run to comfort and choosing to stay and work on that to the point where you understand them, you understand yourself through that process. And I wonder if that's true or not, but I have experienced that and benefited greatly from it. But it's a very hard thing to do. As anyone who's been married more than 20 years knows, there's those times where it's like, oh man. But through that, a lot comes out of that. That might be too much of a hot potato for you even to respond to, so feel free to move on.
No, I mean, I don't. So I think in some situations it is hate or what people believe is hate.
Frustration, difficulty.
But I think, I think hate is not the word I would choose. I think it's more comfort, I think, is the right word. Like, we all have like a world we've built for ourselves and we're comfortable in that world. And when things are outside of that world, for most of us, we just don't want to go there. It's comfortable in our world, right? But we grow when we're uncomfortable. And it's important to push ourselves to do that. I mean, I think it's really important. And I think, for example, like on my podcast right now, I'm doing a series on death and dying because I feel like it's a subject people just don't talk about. And it's so important. And if we spend the time, which is uncomfortable and profound, but if we spend that time when we're not facing an immediate illness or, emergency situation, then I really, really believe, and the reading and research that I've done is aligned with this, that we will have more peace when it comes to that time, whether it's ourselves or somebody that we love. But most of us just like put our head in the sand and we pretend it's not ever going to happen. Of course, it's going to happen to all of us. And I think that's sort of a good analogy for that. May be the most difficult thing, but it's not really different than if I don't agree with you on politics or cultural issues, or in a marriage or in a relationship on who should be cooking dinner or do the laundry. These things become extraordinarily big when we don't address them. And addressing them is not fun and it's not easy, but it's always better. Like, if you think back on the times that you've done it, I think you'll find after the conversation, you felt better and things were better.
Well, if you can find a compromise or a common ground away from your poles, yes, I would agree.
And I think that most of us can do that if we come to a conversation like with openness and respect. I think that's easier in a marriage. It's maybe more difficult on polarizing issues, but even if we don't agree with somebody's perspective, if we understand it better and we can respect it, then we can live together more harmoniously. I mean, which I think is a good objective.
Yeah, that is something that I've found over the last decade of learning to improve at being a husband, and understanding people who would have a different political disposition and psychological disposition than myself, and how to value those that do not see things like you by understanding that I'm not great and intelligent in every area. And there are areas that I have that I'm not great at. And I usually find that those areas are areas that others that are difficult for me at times if I'm not being gracious, that those people are really good in. So if I'm very open as a personality trait, and those who are more highly conscientious can be very difficult for me to understand. But I also know that those people will have a higher degree of respect for boundaries, orderliness, consistency. There'll be more of an emphasis on respect in that thinking more so. And those kinds of things, I understand that people like that excel at or are more exemplary in executing on those types of traits, much more so than myself. And to be able to value and emulate them when I don't feel like excelling in those areas as much as they might, I can look to them as, they have a better grip on these things, and I need to respect and value them for being more of that type of person, and listen to them and gain from that relative perspective in my own life. And by doing that, I can learn a lot from, someone who might be a Trump supporter or a Kamala supporter. I'm usually pretty much dead in the middle politically. But by, being able to hear cognizant arguments for either side and not immediately dismiss them are quite valuable, beneficial, and very healing for relationships and peace and understanding around basically anything, which comes down to the company that you're founding, to stop talking about me and my thoughts all the time, that you're creating a company around the idea of placemaking where this kind of exchange can happen more so, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Yeah, I mean, we did an exercise to try to distill on one piece of paper, like our mission and like, why are we doing this and all of that. And the focus that we came up with is to connect, for people to connect to all that matters. And I think that there are a lot of companies that are focused on like joy and good times. And our company is focused on like the entire spectrum of the human experience, which incorporates grief and sadness and anxiety and disappointment and all of the things. And we all come to all of the relationships that we have with everything that's going on in our lives, right? Whether it's at home, around the dinner table, or at work, in a meeting, it doesn't really matter. We're still bringing our full self, whether we talk about that or not. So the objective is to deepen the connection to yourself, like understand yourself, and then enable you to deepen your connection with other humans. Because I feel like our human connection has been going in the wrong direction. And, if I can make a very small dent in that, I would be very pleased.
Yeah, the idea, I'm feeling this more in my own family, and I'm trying to implement this. I'm trying to guide my two boys and wife for us together to make meals together, sit down together at the same time, take a bite, chew, think, talk, take a bite, chew, think, talk, rather than consume and run. And
Right.
that's, both the preparation of the meal, the making of the meal, the setting of the place, the atmosphere, all those things go into the memory of what that experience actually is. And my wife and I were talking about this the other day, and I had the idea that the time that we spend together intimately around the table is the evidence for the things that we teach them. So whenever we tell them, like, do this, don't do that, live this way, don't live that way, if we don't have positive, meaningful relationship within our family unit, for them to have the feeling associated with the information. As they leave our home and go out into the world and spread who they are into the world in some way, they'll look back and not have the evidence for what they were given as facts taught by mom and dad. And they need to have that both the experience of the story, not just the bullet point facts of the do's and don'ts and those kind of things. It's kind of like how you can tell someone facts, but that won't really change their mind very well. But if you can tell facts through a story, that'll change someone's mind the best, aside from either story or facts. Facts is the least, story is second, but the best is facts combined with narrative story that help change people's minds. So in the same way, I would imagine in raising a family, it's incumbent upon me to provide a place of safety, peace, and warmth that always stays with my children, and then they remember the ideas of the thoughts and the morals exchanged in those situations that then translate into what they create as they make their mark in the world. And that, to me, combined, how do you bring that kind of idea into actual product that you then make and sell?
So the products are, and I have like one of my cups here. I don't know if you can see it, but like,
I want to.
so our goal.
Oh, that's not the perfect coffee mug. I do want to hear more about that.
This is not the
because I have
perfect
my ideas
coffee
on
mug.
that
Yeah.
too. Okay.
But the idea is, so we are taking everyday objects, glasses, mugs, plates, vases, those sorts of things, cutting boards, and thinking about, we don't want to just do what other people have done. So even if it's a very small change, like this glass we've made it sort of like ergonomic. I know it's very close, so it's hard to see, but it holds really nicely in your hand. You can stack it. You can put it in the dishwasher. We also have a craft that it comes with.
Come on, this is so. Someone's not practicing what they preach, am I? Sorry.
Oh, that was great. And so everything is very intentionally made. It may just be like a slight redesign. It's like, but it's how it feels in your hand, how it feels to bring it to the table, all of these little things. And the idea is that difficult conversations are difficult to have, right? And so if we can make the environment very inviting and calm and one that you're very comfortable in, then it's easier to have those conversations. So, and the objects themselves are, we spend, and we can talk about the mug, we can talk about any of the objects, but Dylan is the designer who works with me on all of the different things at Âme Atendre. And Dylan went to the Rhode Island School of Design, so has a formal background. I have, what I know and think and want in my life. And I've already hit 50, so I'm a little ahead of you, but I've had, 50 years on this earth. And I also cook a lot. I spend a lot of time in my home and in my kitchen, and I know what I want. And as I'm getting a little bit older, I know also, like, I care about how I pick things up. So on our cutting board, we put cutouts on the bottom. These are, I've never seen that before, but it makes it so much easier. It's also, beautiful and very high quality. And we also have made it like a decorative piece. But other than that, it's also like highly functional. It's like, how do you store things? How do you pick them up? Can you put everything in the dishwasher and the microwave? And can you use it every day? And can it become part of, the story of your life? Like you were talking about sitting down with your children at dinner, and I couldn't agree more. And I actually don't know the statistics, but I think fewer and fewer families are sitting around the dinner table. And I think it is incredibly important time. And it becomes part of the fabric of your memories and your life. So you remember the conversations you had when you were using that plate or that mug, just like the consistency of sitting down and having the meal together. And even if you don't remember the exact conversation, you remember the feelings that you have and the lessons that you learned. So that's how we're doing it. And then with the podcast, we're bringing it together with sort of having some of these conversations that are often off the table and trying to bring them on the table, and so that we encourage people to have their own conversations around their own tables.
Yeah. So, in what you're saying, I wonder, the degree at which you remember the principles or even the morals translated through relationship around a table with your family. I wonder to what degree color, texture, smell, general aesthetic, atmosphere, I wonder how much of that helps glue that to you as you move forward. Because I watch my youngest son is extremely tactile. Like anything, like the table here, I made, probably 25 years ago. It's not a great thing, but it has a certain mat to it, and there's a texture to it. And every time I watch him, he's always feeling something, especially if it has an interesting texture or a really glossy or really matte or like a lava rock or anything else. He's extremely, extremely tactile. And when a friend of mine who epitomizes what you're designing into your tableware and such, he gave us some coffee cups one year, and my wife noticed it. She's not the aesthetic creative one in our relationship. I am, and that's fine. But she noticed, like right off the bat. She doesn't typically notice these things, but she took one sip of the mug and she's like, "That's the best mug I've ever used as far as the texture." And it had a very matte but soft feel to it, even though it was a porcelain or whatever it was. And like she kept that one aside and would use it all the time because she loved that feel of that. And I think there's a degree at which the combination of colors and textures and everything add to or take away from an experience. And if there's nothing associated with that experience as far as aesthetic and feel and beauty, you value the interaction or the experience accordingly to some degree, I'm sure, subconsciously. And that's where I think the value of that comes in. And that's why I'm trying to put more effort into doing that with my family. I feel it's such an incredibly valuable thing. But how do you keep that vision? How do you keep that vision actually into the products that you have come to market?
Well, it's such a good question. And actually, we're going to do a series on the podcast next year on neuroaesthetics. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's essentially what you're talking about. So it's basically, and it's a term that was coined in the 90s. It's relatively new, but it's this concept of, it's actually the study of the brain in your environment. So it's all the things you were talking about: color, texture, light, dark, all of these different things. And what is it actually doing in your brain? And I have a lot to learn from a scientific and medical perspective about it. I just know what I feel, and I think you know what you feel. And it may well be that some of us feel that more deeply than others. Like you might feel those things more than your wife does. And it may be more important for you in your, growth and in the conversations you have in all of these things. Your environment might be more important to you. It's very important to me. I know that. And so the field is so interesting because there's one architect who's doing a collaboration, for example, like with a hospital. So you think about a hospital and hospital rooms and how awful they are, honestly. I mean, they're like, there's very little that you feel. You certainly don't feel warmth or comfort or security. Well, what if you did? Would your outcomes be different? And so people are starting to do this work. And I think that is just so interesting. You could take it into any environment, an airport, a prison, right? But also in your own home, which is what you control, you get to make those decisions. So I think some of it, in terms of the product, right now, we're still relatively new. We're focusing on products and choosing colors that we hope will speak to people. But we will need time to see, what speaks to people the most. And we also hope to have more options in terms of like color and material over time, because I do think we gravitate towards what feels good to us, right? So like I have this cup in clear and in this teal color, and I always pick the teal color every time in my house. And it just makes me feel happier. I don't know why, it just does. But it would be fascinating if eventually we could study why that is, or if we could know, which colors or textures are going to optimize our outcomes. And I think we should. I think that is like an extremely good place to put some effort. But in the meantime, I think we do know what we like and what we don't like. I tell this story. I don't know if you know the company Stitch Fix. It's a clothing company. So I had a friend.
Are they the ones that send you the like the outfits? Yeah. Okay.
So I have a friend who was working at the corporate offices, and I went to meet them for coffee one day. And I walked into that office, and I've never felt this way in a corporate office. And it was I don't remember exactly the colors, but they were very soft, muted colors, and I think it was like lavenders. And I was like, I immediately felt very at home. And I've never felt that way in a corporate space, So it made such a mark on me because it's so unusual. And so we go into many spaces in our lives that we don't have control over, but in our homes, we do have control, and we can make these decisions with a bit more intention, and then we can see if we think that they are altering sort of not only our relationship with the objects, but our relationship to the spaces, and then to the people within the spaces.
Oh yeah, for sure. Something you said in there, within the neuroaesthetics realm. For me, that ability of calm and to be present in the evening with my family comes when I can organize the visual space enough to where it doesn't cause static in my perception. Very, commercial as an income. I'm an architectural photographer, and I deal with this stuff constantly. So once I get everything cleaned out and aesthetically arranged, I can much more easily choose to be calm and present. But it's hard for me if it's not like that. Now, interestingly, my wife is more so the to-do list for her is the thing that she needs out of the way to be calm. She can be calm in pretty much any aesthetic environment. She can be calm and present as long as her to-do list is done. And so that's I wonder how much of personality type and just generality. I think it's more so the sensitivity to those things is probably different within people, but we all possess them just at different gradients, probably, I would imagine. But as far as neuroaesthetics, I think I'm going to have to do some reading and research on that, because I had always wondered at the beginning of architecture school, they kind of drew these things like a roof that's shaped like a bowl would push you out to the sides, or if it's a peak, it joins you into the center, or if it's sloped, it orients you towards a view. These kind of things, it didn't seem like there's any consistent study of these things, just kind of a subjective understanding that was passed along, but a more scientific approach to taking personality types and just more broad swath of populations and different types of populations, because different populations actually have different, I think, musical scales and stuff that they'll gravitate towards. And so culturally, personality-wise, gender, not stereotypes, but dispositions and everything else, I'm sure are all differently affected by that. And to be able to get to a point of understanding yourself more quickly would allow you to understand others more readily and more quickly as well. And to have that kind of research at your hands to then be able to put into product that is for certain settings or could be tuned towards accommodating different types or gatherings or whatever else, that would be really interesting. Like, oh, it's a holiday gathering and we're going to be with people who we haven't been associating with all year, and opinions might be exchanged. So this color palette is going to be a lot better thing to tempt you to not throw it at your racist uncle or whatever, like that would be really useful.
That would be really useful. I think it's like a relatively new field, but I think it's so fascinating and there's so much promise in it because I think it can or could just help us sort of be our best selves, if that makes sense,
Yeah. Allow for, just as if you're taming a wild animal or wanting to, not befriend a wild animal, but to be able to interact. My wife has horses for about 2 months of the year, and they immediately are more standoffish to me because they don't have the relationship with me, and I don't know how to read their body language. But as soon as I can understand them, I can understand, there's this guy, Monty Roberts, who's a famous horse trainer, trains Queen's horses, blah, blah, blah. He also has deer at his house that are, if you take horses and just turn up the volume as far as their skittishness, deer that much more. And he said, when you approach the deer, if you have your hands more closed, it doesn't feel like claws. So it feels closed and down. Like to us, closed almost means like a fist, but to them, it's claws. And so to understand and how to put someone at ease and calm so they can at least trust everything else, and then they can focus on relating to you and learn how to trust you based on the environment. Okay, there we go. I like that. That's, creating that environment through all the place setting and everything else and the color and the atmosphere. Now I'm understanding. I get that. Okay, great.
Awesome.
Yeah. And next week. Okay, so well-crafted physical objects foster human connection. When I read that, I get that now. That's the thing that I can kind of scratch that off my list of things that you've taught me today. So thank you for that. I like that. The hours involved in the perfect coffee cup. I'd like to hear more about your research and your study, because there's a pottery. There's a woman who does pottery that I photographed her for a local publication a long time ago. Her last name's Evans. I'm spacing on the first part, but I got a coffee cup when we were there. She gave me one, and it's this really beautiful, very organic type of glazing it's really unique. But it had just the perfect amount of thinness to the rim that I preferred. And the handle was in the right place, so the weight didn't feel like it was tipping over too much. It had the right angle on it. And the weight for the cup wasn't too high or too low, and the handle was in the right place. And for me, it held the right amount of volume. And I just loved it. But we have a porcelain sink, and it didn't last longer than having kids. And now I've gotten a few more since then, but it's handcrafted pottery. They're not the same every time, and a couple of them have been a little too heavy on the top and lighter on the bottom, or there's been different things. But that first one, I was like, okay, wow, perfect. But I couldn't quite tell you exactly what it was. I'd love to hear more about your quest for the perfect coffee cup.
So, and we've had a lot of the similar trials and tribulations because to date, our coffee mugs have been hand thrown as well. So they're all different, which is both beautiful and challenging because you photograph one and people think they're going to get that one.
Exactly. Yeah.
And actually,
it's meaningful and important, I think, that uniqueness, because we're all a little different anyways, but we aim at an ideal, even though we know that's not attainable. So I think it's good.
Yeah. And I'll tell you kind of where we're moving towards, which I think is a nice sort of balance between the two. But we started with like what, like all the things you were talking about. How much volume do we want it to hold? And people like different kinds of coffee. Like some people like just black coffee. Some people want a latte. Some people want an Americano. So they're going to probably want different mugs. And then it was, how is the handle attached to the mug? So our mug, and I don't have it here, but can send you images. It's sort of a flat connection, so you can rest your thumb very easily on the top, and it's not like a half heart. It's not quite a typical way that it's attached, but it's very comfortable to put your fingers in. It's also very comfortable to hold it. Like some people like to hold their coffee cup like this. And the glaze is a huge part of it. Also, ours tapers at the bottom, which is more aesthetic than functional, but for us, just different than other coffee mugs. And how thick the handle is also. Like all of these things, we just trialed and trialed and trialed. And the glazes we trialed and trialed and trialed. And ours are matte. We tried glossy, we tried matte, we tried different colors. And it's what you were talking about when your wife found that mug that she loved. It's like this tactility that is just draws you in. And is just, it's just, you just have to try different things until you get there. So, we have this ad and it says we've spent over 400 hours on the mug. Now, frankly, it's more than that because we're moving into like a second iteration to make it a little bit more. We're exploring slip casting the mug instead of hand throwing it, based on a mold of our favorite hand thrown version. So it's still going to be imperfect in the hand throwing, but it will be consistent, which I think is sort of like the best of both worlds. We'll see. It's a work in process. But it's just, I think, something that people have just been drawn to because one, it's different. It's not, it's not so different. Like you look at it, it's a coffee mug. And some people see that ad and they're like, that's absurd. Why would anybody spend that much time on a single product? But it's what our company is about, right? It's about taking as much time as we need to create the object that we are trying to create that we hope you will connect with. And a lot of people are connecting with our coffee mug. It just happens to be. I think that they have opportunities to connect with other products too, but for some reason, aesthetically, so far, that is like the number one bestseller for sure.
That's interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to send you a photo of my version of what I found to be that could be an interesting just social media thing for you guys. Like, send us pictures. You probably already did that. Like, yeah, send us all of your version of the perfect coffee mug. And like a collage that then forms the picture of your coffee mug.
Yeah.
Like
and then it's like the functional things. Like I like to reheat my tea or coffee. When I put it in the microwave, the handle doesn't get hot. Okay, that's amazing. A lot of ceramic gets really hot because it's not high quality. It's not fired at a high enough temperature to protect it. Like all of these things that we are digging into. So it's like going sort of that extra mile, I think.
Right.
For things that you might not see when you're looking at it, but you certainly will experience when you're using it.
Yeah. That how do you hold your coffee mug? I'm interested.
I do it two ways.
Typically.
One, I like to hold it by the handle, and two, I do like to hold it like this.
Okay.
From the bottom, I like that too.
I do the handle, and then I use my thumb I like a pretty big cup of coffee. And so it gets a little heavy, but I like that. But then I also like to put my hand around the mug under the handle,
Yes.
and be able to feel the full warmth. But I guess I do sometimes do that, but I like the handle to be over like part of, in case I need to use the thumb for something, or if got to like push a kid like back into Keep doing your homeschool. I don't know. I mean, my son wakes up at like 6 a.m. every morning. So the two of us always end up on the couch next to the fire while he's working and I'm sipping on coffee. So it's always, holding something and something. And so you kind of have a little bit of, save your opposable thumb to be able to use it still, maybe. I don't know. So the change from hard charging corporate life to then going into entrepreneurship around something that you're passionate about. I'd like to hear more about that. My thought process or my experience with going from, I tried to be an architect for 3 years, went into business with a friend of mine. It just didn't match my personality type. And it was too similar. The day-to-day of it was very, very similar, which was hard for me as being open. Like I wanted change. I wanted more change. And going from that to photography felt like totally second nature to me. I just got it, even though I'd never had any training or anything in it. And it was constantly changing, constantly a new subject, which was great. But there's also involved in turning something that you love into something that you exchange into, currency.
Right.
You lose something in that too. So I'd like to hear more about your experience and your advice as you would have for people going through this process or thinking about going through the process that you have.
Yeah. So, I mean, first I should say I really enjoyed practicing law, and in the end I sort of broadened out. I was the chief administrative officer, so I was more than, I ended up leaving legal behind even. But I learned a lot through my career. I worked both at a big law firm and then at a number of companies. And I think it was instrumental in being able to start my own business. One, because when I worked at a law firm, I worked at a big law firm in the Silicon Valley, and we worked with a lot of startup companies. So I saw a lot of brand new companies and everything that they were going through firsthand, because they could be very small companies, So sort of the trials, the tribulations, the importance of learning from failure, the importance of pivoting, understanding, your burn, how much, your budgeting, all of these things, I think was really helpful. And I had that for years. And then I worked at 23andMe, which was a startup. I was like the 14th employee there. So I also worked at like very small companies that then grew much larger. And that was also, aside from like the legal aspects or whether I was doing HR or legal or other things, I got to observe just the company as an organism and how it functioned and grew, which I think was extremely helpful. The other thing that was helpful was just having teams. So being on teams with people and then managing other people, understanding sort of that human relationship and how to effectively work with people. All of those things, incredibly helpful. I also got to do some really interesting work substantively over those 20 years. But to your point, I was working extremely long hours. I traveled a lot. I wasn't home as much as I wanted to be. And I had an internal conflict about that. I'm a big believer that we have seasons in life. So I don't think that, everybody has to say like right out the gate, I'm going to start my own company. I think that you can learn, and often do learn, a lot from working for other people and in other contexts.
Oh yeah.
Before you go out and decide to do your own thing. And, and having the currency to raise the family was very important. So, right. So there's that aspect of it as well. I'm extremely fortunate that I was able to sort of step back and say, okay, to pivot and do something that's more like feeding my soul, I would say. And maybe partially that also has to do with like being in the second half of my life. And there's a beautiful book I can send it to you after, but it's all about like finding meaning in the second half of life. And I think that our skill sets change, our abilities shift. And it's important to sort of recognize and capitalize on those things. And I do think that generally speaking, we become a bit more introspective because we understand, whether it's subconscious or conscious, that we have a certain amount of years here, and that we want to optimize the time we have with things that we feel are worth our time. So I think for me, it was all of those things. And my boys are now teenagers, and I was getting into this phase where I felt like when they were young, I could outsource a lot of just driving them to and fro and those kinds of things. But for the teenage years, I really wanted to be present and to be available, because and this has been my experience, the shift goes from being worried about like them physically hurting themselves to worrying about mentally where they're at and who they're, growing into as adults. And I just wanted to be around and not traveling so much and more present. So I think all of those things led me to decide to start Âme Atendre. And we are still small. I mean, we have consultants, and we have, people who work with us part-time, but we are essentially 3 full-time people. And so I'm still wearing all of the hats, and I actually really like that. I do think as companies grow, then people get stuck in, wait, I started this so that I could design products, but now I'm not designing products. I'm just, doing marketing or what have you. I'm not at that place yet, but I think that I'm at a place in my evolution where I understand what's feeding me and what's not. So I think I will be very intentional about that as the business grows. But for me, I really enjoy having to learn about marketing and advertising and inventory management and design, and working with, we work with small artisans all over the world. It's a lot of work. We have a lot of prototyping, a lot of R&D. Things take way longer than you suspect that they will. But I actually enjoy all of it. And I think and hope that there is a growing group of us who also appreciate that a mug could take that much time to design, and that we are, hand making, like even these glasses are they're like predominantly handmade. And there is a beauty to that I think people are able to appreciate now, particularly when we have so many mass market products that are much harder to connect with, honestly, So advice, I would say, and I think, most people say this, like really want to do the thing that you're going to start a business around, because it's hard and you are likely to fail, right? Most businesses fail in the first 5 years. But if you're really passionate about it, then you can view even your failures as successes, in the sense that you're learning and that it's moving you forward. And then, a lot of people say like you have to be willing to take risk. That's true if you're self-funding it, and a lot of people self-fund their endeavors. But I also think we're all taking more risk than we know in every job these days, because job security is not what it used to be. So I actually think that is less of an impediment to, going out and starting something you're passionate about. But I do think you need to plan. You need to be really focused on creating financial statements and budgets, and knowing how much runway you have, and allocating dollars to specific areas of the business, and then reviewing them at regular intervals and deciding if that money should still be spent in those areas. All of that takes a certain amount of financial literacy, number one. And I think commitment and focus. And not everybody has that. And that's okay. So it's just about sort of coming back to Âme Atendre, like honoring who you are, what your strengths are, and focusing there.
I'm writing down a couple ideas or aspects of my life that are connecting with things that you're saying that help me understand more. When did you feel? Was there a marked year that you felt a difference in seasonal change of life? Because I had there was a year in my 40s where it was like something is completely different this year.
For me, I think it all coincided with COVID, and I think that's just happenstance, honestly, or partially happenstance. But I left Jewel in January of 2020, right before COVID, which turned out to be great timing because I could focus on the family, and then we ended up moving. And I think it was sort of having that time for me, it was having that time to reflect and really think about what I wanted. And I also think COVID pushed that on many of us, and me. I definitely felt this because it was so scary at first, and we didn't really understand, like, can we keep our families safe? Is everybody going to be okay? And it made me really think about life more deeply. And is this the life that I want for me and my husband and my children? And why or why not? And if not, then like, what am I doing? I don't know how much time there is. Like, why would I not make a change? And all of that led us to make some pretty big changes. So I think for me, it may also have been, coincided with my age, and that I think that is seasonal as well. But I think really for me, COVID was the instigator.
Yeah. For me at 44, for some reason, I could feel like something's different. It just all of a sudden, like, I am not the kid in the room anymore, which is silly to say at 44. I'm a late bloomer. But it so marked in my thinking, how I related to my kids, how I related to life. I stopped quite so much seeking stimulation in life and started seeking out giving more atmosphere and peace and attention to others. It was really weird, the switch, very marked. And I saw later a study that said your most marked ages for change in aging are 44 and 60. And this was after I already had told multiple people, like, something's different. That is really weird. So that was just interesting that you had said that. And I definitely find that, post 40, there's a difference from must establish name for self, which was kind of a selfish, self-centered drive that was pushing me. I got to a place where I much more so got more fulfillment from helping others for some reason. I don't know if I felt like I got to a place where I didn't have to worry about I didn't have to worry about my own survival as much. I don't know exactly what played into that, but that was always something that stood out to me. In another thing, interesting that connects to this is my wife and I think during COVID, we bought an Airstream camper, and funny story around that whole thing, but another time. But we told ourselves, and we'll Airbnb it to see if we can make some money off of it, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't do that for like the first 2 years or whatever, just because I loved it too much and I didn't want to like scratch it or, see a fingerprint on it, And, but this last year we decided like, all right, let's see if we can do this. And so down near the lower portion of our property where we have woods, basically my wife's idea was like, I love the woods, how they are, they're natural. Let's just clean out all the dead stuff and just cut in a little patch where we rim it with nice bigger rocks. We're in Maine, we got a lot of that. And then, and my thought was like, well, let's infill it with crushed marble. So there's this beautiful crushed marble rimmed with rocks and a nice little gazebo with fire pit, the Airstream, and the ground cover is just like wintergreen and blueberries all around it. And when you go into that area, how the light filters in and just the sound of the crickets and the birds and the tree frogs and the peepers and and the way I was thinking about it was like, all right, let's make a ultimate luxury retreat forest bath with one vacancy. That's it, for now. Yeah. And in thinking that way, I started to put attention into every single detail to give something to the people that came and stayed there to like notice like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. And it's not complete yet. There's outfitting out the interior of it still. I haven't really gotten that to gel quite perfectly yet. And I'm the only one in my family who can really put a lot of thought into this. My wife acts as the approval board, and I keep coming up with ideas, and it's a good interaction that way. And she manages all the contractors and everything else to get, the excavator to not drive into the forest and kill all the wintergreen and blueberries, and it wasn't easy. But she managed that incredibly well. But that idea of when you actually make a space based on the experience and the beauty, not the utility of what you're offering, the amount of return on that investment. So when you combine all those things, it's definitely not cheap, and people love it every single time. Every single person that comes leaves, like you said, and I've never valued this like I should, but they'll leave a handwritten note saying how much that time away from everything and in that place meant to them. Yeah. It wasn't at a hotel, it wasn't at a chain, it was just in the woods. But it was thought out, and it was lovingly made and given, and that there's something so valuable that people take away from that there's a lot of economy to that is very valuable. And it's hard for some people to see that you can do that. But if you have the talent, or if you hire someone with talent to do that, it's a really interesting thing, and it's very fulfilling to see appreciated and watch people benefit from that. So I get what you're saying. And because you're saying it and you're in that position, it's confirming what I had a hunch that hopefully people would value. And the fact that people enjoy it is a great thing too. Let's see, did you know Tyler at Jewel?
Yes.
Oh, whoa, that's weird. Okay. So I don't know Tyler, but one of my really good friends from high school is really good friends with him. And so there are two Tylers. There was a CEO and then a legal person.
He was legal. Okay. I know him, but I don't know him well.
Right. Yes. Right. Just a common connection. Oh, wow. I'm going to have to tell my buddy Everett that like, hey, I talked to someone who, yeah. Anyways, elements of a good gathering. To wrap this up, what do you think the key elements, so I can try and employ this or apply this as I try and make some nice settings for my family? Yeah. What are the elements of a good gathering to really facilitate people? Now, this is interesting. Whenever anyone gets in the Airstream just to come say hi, if we're somewhere and they come over, they don't leave as soon as they would were it not in the Airstream. There's something about the space being very unique and very pleasing that people stay more there than any architectural beautiful house, because it's always an intimate setting because you just can't fit that many people in. Yeah. And people just all of a sudden they kind of just, and then they start talking, and it's just, they stay longer. That there's something about that space. So yeah, elements of a good gathering.
So for me, there are a few of them. One of them is the physical space, making it welcoming. And that's, how you set your table, how, to me, it's like color and texture and lighting and music and all of those things. That varies person to person. I think the things that should be the same person to person are: invite your guests, be ready to greet them when they come to your house. So I used to try to like plan much more like elaborate dinners, and I've learned to not do that. So I'll have like appetizers out, whatever I've cooked hopefully can just be heated up in the oven or is simmering on the stove. And I am like fully present when I'm opening the door. I think you would, if you think about it, you would be surprised how often that's not the case. Like one of the hosts is like really busy in the kitchen or this or that. And I think this idea of like fully being present to welcome your guests is something that everybody should do and everybody can do, you know? And the other thing is and I don't know, some people are going to be more comfortable with this or less comfortable, but if you're comfortable with it, to have a topic of conversation that you are asking people to engage in around the table. And it could
Democrat or Republican? Who?
Maybe wouldn't start there, but my hypothesis is there is no reason we shouldn't be able to talk about anything. We should be able to talk about politics.
You should be able to talk about difficult subjects.
We should, but a way to but it's, you know, maybe not like the subject, right? But like I did this one time where I had a group of friends over for coffee and I told them in advance. It's helpful if you tell people in advance, but you don't have to if people are like game. And our conversation was like, share something in your life that you're really afraid of. And not necessarily like a snake, and I'm very afraid of snakes, but something a little bit deeper than that, right? Like, and we got some really good, deep stories like from people that I knew, but I would never have known that about them if it hadn't been the question we were talking about. I think so often when we gather, it's the same thing. It's like, how's the family? How are the kids? How's the weather? How's your job? And those are fine, but they're kind of boring. And you're not really going to learn deeper things about people that you know that way, right? But I think you will be surprised if you say, this is the subject that we're going to talk about. And people you don't force people, obviously, if they don't want to. How many people will? I had a guest on my podcast who was talking about a subject called ethical wills, which is super interesting. It's basically intentional communications to loved ones that you can do while you're alive or you can leave them when you're dead. And she said when she does gatherings, one of the things she does is tell me who you were at 8 years old, 30 years old, and whatever, like 2 or 3 ages. And she's like, sometimes we never get past the second age because people have so much to say. And I mean, have you ever asked a good friend, like, what were you like when you were 8 years old? I mean, it's so interesting and you're going to learn so much about people. So the truth is,
that's a good one.
It's much less about the food. It's much more about the care, right? And I love Ina Garten. She's like one of my idols and one of the people that when I was putting together my company, like the ethos of who she is and what she embodies was important to me. And she had this quote, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but it was something like, when I invite you over to my house for dinner, I hope you know that I'm saying I love you. And I think it's that sentiment that like you invite people into your house, you want that deeper connection. And there are ways to get at that deeper connection that take a little bit of risk and a little bit of work. But I think you'll find most people will be game, and then you will learn a lot and it will deepen your connection to those people.
Yeah. So my mom, I don't know that she always, I don't know how much she loves cooking, but she shows us that she loves us through providing that and a beautiful space for us.
Yeah.
As much as I love working to provide for my family, I'm sure it's
Right.
always, something that is you have to do to achieve. But she would on Friday nights we'd usually have a family dinner and we'd have people over typically, and she'd had this game that I kind of liked, kind of hated, just depended on the mood I was in. But she'd put a card under people's plates that was it was called the game. Have you heard of this?
No.
And like you were saying, instead of being like a single subject question, like tell us about yourself at 8, 16, 26, and 40, it was like, it was some kind of similar question, but it's a whole pack of cards of all these different questions. And so you look under your plate and each person has a different thing that's kind of like tell us something that you're afraid of, or it was a thing like that.
Yeah.
And so we'd go around the whole table and each person down to the kids would share something like that. And that was always a really meaningful thing, even if at times, like when she's like, all right, if you look under your plate, and I go, oh, here we go again, but I look back at it now and, the discomfort with having to think and come up with something as a kid in front of adults was really good training. And it served me very well. And it taught me that, getting out of your comfort zone, being vulnerable, learning to trust, learning to share, learning to not shame, learning to value, learning to comfort others, learning to be comfortable with the expression of emotion between people, is something that is very, very valuable. And I always appreciated that, and it's something I should probably take my own advice and start to implement. Another thing that you were saying, inviting people over and having kind of an atmosphere, being ready for people. We don't always have the time to do that, but what I've found is my wife and I set kind of some goals in the early part of our marriage that we would take off the month of February. We would save all year to not have to work during those times, and we'd take that time to just recuperate and, get out of the winter for a little bit, right? And since we've gotten older, we've been able to graduate to more and more time, which is great. But we've been driving out to California, pulling the Airstream, and then we'll rent a house in Ventura for a little while and make our way back and visit family and national parks on the way back. Kids are homeschooled. It works out. It's wonderful. But the thing I found is that when we rent the house in Ventura, it's become tradition that a lot of different friends from the span of our lives will come to visit because we've got a place really close to the beach, and just, it's free. Come on, guys, just come.
Yeah.
We don't care. Just come. And a few years ago, I remember sitting down and talking with my wife and saying, like, this costs a lot of money, but it's such a good investment.
Yeah.
When I look at it that way, it's the economy of it is deeply meaningful. And we've chosen to continue to foolishly not put money into other things and continue to do this, kind of foolishly, right? But the thing we found is that connection to continue to get the broad spectrum of personalities and opinions and political views to expose our kids to blend our kids into understanding others from different parts of the country, different cultures, and everything else is incredibly valuable. And the thing I've found as it relates to gathering together in the evening is that I can do kind of what you might call a servant leadership thing, where I'll usually try and make tacos in the evening, but I'll ask people, I'll put on some good music, and I'll ask people, hey, do you mind cutting up the mushrooms and then starting to fry them there? I'm going to do this. And, Grayson, my son, will you do that? Simon, you want to do this? Yeah, okay. And we all get around the counter and we're making it together and the music's going, we're talking, and it's such like every single person isn't there like, I gotta do that. It's like there's music, we're happy, we're looking at each other, we're sharing. And it's such a beautiful moment when I watch it in the moment. It's just, and that is so lost in today's society with how fast we move and how much we just, go by.
Yeah.
And
Well,
to save me here. What do you got to say?
No, first of all, it's just beautiful. And I couldn't agree more. And actually, like, the driving force of our move from California to Utah was to slow things down. Like, we saw, like, our kids are like going from school to this sport, to this activity. And there's like no time to just like be a kid. And we're like rushing in our careers to make enough money to live in the city and like, and to send our kids to these schools and blah, blah, blah. And like, what is it all for? You know? So I think with COVID, we had this like time to like really think about that and say, well, no, we want to slow things down. And we moved to Park City, which is like a very mountain outdoors town. So like, there's just all year round, people are outdoors here. And the other thing that's so wonderful about this place is people are sort of like your experience going to Ventura. People here move from all over the country. So it's kind of like a melting pot, and you have all these different perspectives and ways of looking at the world. And it's beautiful. And the one thing is, which I think is the same as your beach house, is everybody is here because they chose to be here. Everybody's coming to you because they want to be there. And there's something with that as a starting point, as an ingredient, that makes for like a beautiful tableau.
Intentionality.
Right?
Yeah.
And then it's like, no, it's not work to help with dinner. It's like fun, and it's part of the experience. And I mean, it's so beautiful. And I agree that we don't do these things enough. And I don't mean to say like you can have people over and do that, like where you're cooking with them. But if you are going to cook for them, don't make them feel like you're getting put out to do it. Like, be present when they show up.
Yeah.
So that it's really about having the time together. Because at the end of the day, again, we don't know how much time we have. Like, we should really honor the time that we have instead of just like going through the motions of it.
Yeah. Very, very interesting to hear about the philosophy, vision, and the meaning behind what you're doing, and the intentionality of creating something of value that brings people together. Such a great thing. Really appreciate being able to pick your brain on that, to pull from your vast experience of going from between these two different types of lives, and what you've chosen. So thank you. I'd love to. I'm gonna send you my favorite coffee mug. I'd love your opinion on it.
Please do.
And I'm gonna have to buy a couple of your coffee mugs because I'm gonna have to do some tests. So hey.
All right, the test is on. Well, thank you. It's been such a pleasure to be with you and to talk with you. And I love your podcast and what you're doing, and your sensibility is really beautiful. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Where can people learn more about your company and your podcast and your Instagram or anything else?
So the company is www.âmeatendre.com. I'm going to spell it because it is not typical.
French.
AMEATENDRE.com.
Okay.
And the podcast is On the Table with Ashley, which you can find on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you listen to podcasts. It's also linked on our website, and our Instagram is at Âme Atendre, and TikTok and Facebook and all the rest as well. And great. I'll just give our email, reach out anytime at Âme Atendre. We love, love, love to get feedback on products that you would like to see us develop, and or subjects you would like us to cover on the podcast as well.
Awesome. Oh, I'd love to. I'm definitely going to be listening to. I did not even know you had a podcast. I'm very sorry for that. But I'm definitely going to be listening to your series that you're doing on death. I've oddly put a lot of thought into that recently. I think it's probably just the age my parents are at. Sorry, Mom and Dad, but it happens. And graduating into the young senior citizen realm, we'll call it. That you're right. That starts to be something that focuses you more and really makes you think about the value of what you have. So
absolutely.
Thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you for going into those subject matters too. I'm going to check it out, and thanks for coming on the show here. Thank you.
My pleasure.